Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Generations podcast. We've been giving you episode by episode coverage of the Acolyte, but sometimes it's good to talk to some new voices and to take a little bit of a larger lens. And so today I have two great guests with which we're going to look back on these first four episodes, the first half of the Acolyte TV show, if I've done my math correctly. I think four is half of eight. Um, and talk a little bit about kind of how we feel about the overall show, the themes it's raising, what it tells us about the larger Star Wars galaxy, the characters, all of that. And first, of course, we have returning guest Danielle, written in the Star Wars. Danielle, do you want to give a quick introduction for those who haven't heard you before?
Yeah, I'm Danielle. I mostly post on Twitter and TikTok. On TikTok, I'm written in the Star Wars, and I post about Star Wars, obviously, but also other media. I write reviews for Temple of Geek for a wide variety of media. So yeah, come find me and talk to me about it.
Definitely. Yeah. I first found Danielle through her TikTok content. It is fantastic. A lot of great things to say. And joining me for the first time, though I hope this will be the first of many, is Brian Kowal. Brian, someone who I know well through the Magic the Gathering Brian is someone who I know well through Magic the Gathering world, but I know also is someone who I've been really enjoyed talking to about Star Wars, has had a lot of opinions that made me think about things in new ways, and so I wanted to have him on the show. Brian, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me. I'm an LGS owner in Madison, Wisconsin. And like you said, I've played a lot of Magic through the years. And I watch a lot of Star Wars and think about it. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. For those who are not in the know, LGS is local game store, the kind of places that is awesome to support if you're looking to buy card games, Magic, Pokemon, board games, D&D, all that kind of stuff. And if you're in Madison, definitely check out. Brian, what's the name of your store?
Misty Mountain Games.
Misty Mountain Games. The first place I ever started playing once I got back into organized play. So a great place. So let's jump into this topic directly. And we're not going to go over too much of like the kind of minute details. We want to talk about the larger picture and some specific stuff I want to ask. But first, just in general, Danielle, starting with you, what do you think of the show so far?
I've enjoyed it. It's been really interesting. I think because it's an era of Star Wars that we've not really explored on like live action before. And so it kind of brought with it, I think, a lot of maybe expectation of how it was going to fit in, but also a lot of newness and freshness to it. I think it's kind of thrived off of that. My only gripe with it is that the episodes, I was hoping with the first two episodes both being like 40 plus minutes long, that's how it was going to be for the rest of the season. And this last episode was only like 30 minutes. And so it still seems to be an issue with Disney Plus shows for both Star Wars and MCU. But otherwise, I think they've done a pretty good job at telling a pretty cohesive narrative so far and keeping it interesting, like keeping it intrigued. When one mystery is solved, we're very quickly told that actually wasn't the mystery that they were leading towards all along. And so it keeps me involved in it, keeps me excited.
I like. Brian, what about yourself?
So overall, I think I'm loving it so far, but I think I want to like asterisk it because it feels like they're setting up a lot of payoffs later, and I'm believing in the creators so far, and I really like okay, so the first two episodes came out and I was like blown away. I'm like, this might be the best Star Wars show ever. I just thought it was like just so on and such a great watch, and like so much cool stuff. They hint at a lot of cool stuff going on, and yeah, really dug at the first two. The third episode, I mean, I think that's how I started talking to you about this. Maybe no, I guess I started talking to you as soon as the show started up. But the third episode, I think I really hope there's more going on than what they're showing. I feel like we've talked about like I kind of hope there is some kind of Rashomon effect going on, and there's stuff we weren't told about what was happening in that third episode. And I think if there isn't, I'm gonna like I'm always gonna like look at that third episode in a different light. But I kind of trust the creators. And this fourth one, sorry if I'm just going out episode by episode instead of like an overview.
Let me just say a quick reminder. The third episode is the flashback where we see what happened, or at least as they remember it, to the group that was raising May and Osha. And I think the question you're raising, which I think a lot of us have, is it didn't seem like from what we saw that the Jedi did something bad enough to have the reactions that so many of them were having. And as well as some things just not really making sense, at least from some perspectives. So I think I share your feeling about wanting to have that further explained, but I just want to, for those who didn't remember exactly what episode we were talking about. Anyway, go on.
Right. I will say, after watching the 4th episode, I already believe that they're already hinting that it is not the whole story for that 3rd episode. I think, and this wasn't until I did a second watch it. I just did a second watch of the 4th episode before doing the podcast, because podcast jitters. I want to make sure I'm really on task with it. But I've never talked about media on any kind of show, so this is like really exciting to me to be on here. But watching the 4th episode again, it feels like there's like just the way the Jedi Council is like, hey, we didn't know what happened on that planet. What the hell is what went on there? Like why didn't we know about that? Like what happened on that planet is not something that they wouldn't report. So I think it's like, I think there's some dirt, and I'm really hoping we find out what it is. And the 4th episode, the first time I watched it, I thought it was my least favorite. And I watched it again, and now I really love it. Like I was like, so I think a big thing about this show is every time I've watched every episode twice now, and they've all been better the second time I watched them. So that's pretty cool. That's usually like one of my signs of like really good media is when the rewatch is as good or better than the first.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing I'm finding, and I'm curious both your thoughts on this. Granted, I tend to prefer, I'll admit I have a strong bias towards shows that come out all at once and you can binge all at once. Mm-hmm. And I was talking about this a bit last episode because Aaron, my other co-host, one of my 2 co-hosts on the show normally, called me out on that. And I think it's that for more episodic television, I really love week to week. And frankly, I would love a High Republic episodic show where it was about a group of Jedi, and it was about like the day to day, like, oh yeah, today we're going to go rescue this cat in a tree, and today we're going to go deal with this planetary dispute, and today we're going to go deal with this thing that might be a dark side. And like, over the course of however many episodes, a big bad is established, and then the plots move forward that way.
Like a Jedi cop show.
Yeah, I mean, ACAB and all, but something like that.
Yeah.
I think we're exploring some of the ACAB parts of the Jedi in this.
Maybe, yeah.
But
I
think part of my problem with this, and I'm curious, Danielle, your thoughts on this, because we have the week to week, and we live in the world we live in, where media is, going to do what it's going to do, social media. Every time we're left with a mystery, there's so much speculation, and even if you're like, you sign off entirely, just in your own head, you've got a week to go like, I wonder what happened on that planet. Why were there no burn marks? I wonder who this person with, Darth Sharktooth is, like what's going on? Mm-hmm. Whereas you're right. I think like a couple nights ago, I watched all 4 episodes at once and I was like, oh, this is amazing. I am loving it this way. And every show up till now, I've watched week to week, been a little frustrated by it, and then rewatched it with my partner, Mary, all in one day or in like 2 days, and absolutely loved it. What do you think, Danielle? Like, I know, like you said, we're getting mystery to mystery. Do you think it's better that we're waiting each week? Do you think it would be better if this was coming out a little faster? Or as you said, even just longer episodes?
I think I prefer, because I get what you mean. There are some shows that I prefer to watch all in one go. And I think an example of that for me is like The Boys. I prefer to watch The Boys in my own time and not have it be like a week to week, have to wait thing. But with this show and most of Star Wars, I think I like the speculation period. I like to have the time to sit with it. And I didn't have screeners for the Acolyte, but I had screeners for like the Bad Batch. And sitting and watching those all in one go because I have to get my thoughts down and my things written before it comes out was fine, but it also wasn't as fun as getting it one episode and then getting to talk about that episode with friends and getting to spot different things, see what other people have noticed about the episode that I didn't. letting that kind of not influence, but add to my analysis of the episode and what I think of it before moving on to the next thing. And I think that, like, I don't know, I think some things get lost in the binging mode for some things. Some things are looked over and not noticed until much later. And I think that it's a lesson in patience, I think, sometimes, and a lesson in just kind of letting yourself sit with the thoughts and things like that. But yeah, I understand the two sides of it, because there are shows that I prefer to binge.
Yeah. I mean, and Bad Batch is one that I'll say, I thought that is a lot close, not as much the last season, but in general, that show was much more of the episodic kind of thing that I'm talking about. And I loved that it was week to week. One quick thing I want to say in terms of that is that one of the things that does make it great is, like you said, hearing all the people's ideas. And I just want to take this moment to remind our listeners, your feedback is one of the best parts of that for me. And I think for everybody here, we love getting to hear what you guys got to say. And so please always remember, like, if you ever have thoughts about this, you want to share, if you have questions you want us to talk about, ideas you want to have us discuss, you can send in the email, Facebook, Twitter, Discord. If you can figure out a carrier pigeon, go for it. Though I generally keep my windows closed because of AC in the summer. But if it knows how to tap on the window, I'll let the carrier pigeon in. Whatever it is, all that information is in the show notes and on the website, theethicalpanda.com. So please feel free to always send us feedback. Danielle, what did you think of episode 3 in terms of the version we were given of their what happened to May and Osha, and why everyone's so upset about it?
Oh, I thought it was really interesting for multiple reasons. I mean, the Force lore in that is, I'm a High Republic book series Phase 2 girly. And that episode felt so much like Phase 2 of the High Republic, and how it dealt with different understandings of the Force, and how people approach it differently, and what they think of it, and how it should be used, and things like that. And so I really appreciated that. I thought it was very clear that that was Osha's perspective of what happened, because she's the first person we see in that episode. And the last one, really, we see in that episode too, or almost May's the last one. But I think that, we stayed with her in the room when May left and burned her journal. And when they were separated, we didn't go with May to see what happened. We stayed with her. And so I think that there's definitely more to the story. I absolutely, unfortunately, think that the Jedi did something they shouldn't have done, whether it was on purpose or because they were misled by outside forces to think that something was going on that maybe wasn't. I don't know. I do think we'll find out. I'm just hoping that my dear Master Soul didn't have too much to do with it. I'll be heartbroken.
Yeah. I will say, having first known that actor from Squid Games, seeing him be this, like, the softest, sweetest cinnamon roll that you've ever seen is very strange, though he's doing a fantastic job of it. We will get in a moment to another actor playing very against the type he was used to, Mr. Jason from Jacksonville. But yeah, I think one of the things I liked most about that episode is how much complexity it offered. I think there's a tendency often to be like, are the Jedi good guys or bad guys? Are they the heroes or are they the villains? And to put this very black and white thinking onto stuff that, it's probably a better term than black and white thinking, I apologize for that, but very kind of binary one or the other thinking. And like, when I rewatched that confrontation between the Jedi and the clan, the group of witches, it's really clear that, like, neither one am I like, oh yeah, you're totally in the right, like, I'm watching the Jedi come in very imperialistic, very like, we know what's right, you're wrong. And at the other time, like, I'm watching this other group, like, indoctrinate children into this cult-like attitude that I can understand the Jedi not loving, and both sides just being very defensive and all of this. And I just, I think I'm with you both. Like, I'll probably be disappointed if we don't get that payoff in some way, but I think there's enough stuff that seems so intentional in how it's done. Like, even just going back to that first episode and realizing there's that moment when we first meet OSHA and the fire happens on the ship, and she has a flashback to hearing voices. At the time, we had no idea what it meant, and so I forgot about it. But now I was like, oh, she's having the flashbacks to the fire. Like, at this point, I'm trusting the authors. I'm trusting the makers of the show because it seems like they've earned that so far.
Yeah.
What are we thinking in terms of... Let me start again. So Danielle, talk more about the group of witches and what you mean in terms of like the Force lore that we're getting at there, because I'm also a huge High Republic fan, but I know a lot of our listeners are not.
Yeah, I've never read it, so I'm really interested to hear that too.
Yeah. So in High Republic Phase 2, that takes place about 200 years before the Acolyte, and it really dives into other organizations or other groups who are either Force sensitive themselves, but they're not Jedi, they're not Sith, they're the secret third thing. No, they're other groups that just use the Force differently, and they have different tenets that they stand by. And some of them use the light side, some of them use the dark side, some of them use a mixture. And they all have representation on Jedha. They're part of this thing called the Convocation, and they essentially just kind of they meet every now and then. They help each other figure things out. Sometimes they have a lot of disputes about things, but the big running line through Phase 2 is this group of people who aren't Force users, but they have a belief about the Force, and that is that the Jedi, and mainly the Jedi, but other groups of Force wielders as well, are abusing the Force, and that by using it to prevent things from happening or to encourage things to happen, so say that a Jedi uses the Force to save someone's life, to stop them from getting run over by a cart or a speeder or something, they've taken the thread of life essentially and changed it. And this was meant to happen. That death was meant to happen. But because they've abused the Force, they've changed the trajectory of something else. And it has to be a life for a life. So because that person lived when they were supposed to die, someone else is going to die then who wasn't supposed to bring back the balance there. And so the way that the Coven in Episode 3 talk about the thread, instead of really the Force, they call it this thread. And there's a push and a pull and all of these things happening with the Force. It reminded me so much of that group, even though the Coven uses the Force, and the group, which they're called the Path, in Phase 2 of the High Republic, don't use the Force. There was so much similarity there to their understanding of it that it felt so much kind of like an evolution of it a bit, to involve the Force in a much deeper way. And so I loved getting to see that and have it feel familiar to something that has already been explored in the books. And I hope maybe it'll encourage people to go read them too if they want to, because they are really, really, really good.
Yeah.
Are the Path people like religious zealots, or are they?
Yeah. They're basically a cult. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and with that same idea of like, there's lots of people kind of hanging around the edges who are just like, oh yeah, this seems pretty cool and interesting, and I'm with this. And then as you get more and more to the inner circle, it becomes more and more of a cult. And eventually there's a group that becomes not the Path, but the Fist, and much more like anti the Jedi. And to me, one of the things I love most about it is not only does this learning about more groups that have feelings about the Force and don't necessarily love the way the Jedi do it, not only is it a payoff to the High Republic books, which are right now some of the earliest part of the chronology that we have in the Disney canon, but it also ties into The Last Jedi, which is at almost the end of the timeline right now of the Jedi canon, the Disney canon, because, there's a line where Luke says that one of the faults of the Jedi was believing they had a monopoly on the Force, that they were the only path to the Force, which probably sounds weird at the time because the Jedi and the Sith are the only people we've seen who use the Force. So, of course. And to me, this all further emphasizes the idea of no, the Jedi are one group who understands the Force, but they're not the only one. And I think that's the flip side that, and here's kind of a good segue to the next thing I wanted to ask about, because I think a lot of us, myself probably included, kind of got sucked into the idea of, okay, we're learning an acolyte to dark side powers, so this must be the Sith themselves specifically. And now I think we're getting a lot more of a sense of this might not be the Sith. This might be some splinter group. This might be some other dark side related group. And maybe the Sith is kind of like pulling their strings, or maybe the Sith is completely uninvolved. What's your take on that in terms of where we're going with our dark side characters?
Well, I will say, I think when that dark force or dark side of the Force user shows up at the end of the 4th episode,
Darth Shark.
I don't think there's any question he's Sith. I don't know. He's just like, I guess, like, I mean, nobody says he's Sith, but like, that's a Sith Lord, right? Like, it has to be, right? I don't know. There's just so many like things about him that I would almost feel robbed at this point if they don't say the Sith Lord.
I go back and forth on it. I think that it would. I see both merits of both sides of it, and I think I'd be excited about either of them. With the Sith, I think it adds more to. It would add more to Sith lore than we know already, and that's always really exciting to see how it would fit in there, and how to explore more of what was happening with the Sith in this time when they were hidden. And Leslie Headland has said that she wanted to explore when the Sith were kind of the underdogs before they rose back to power. And so I could see that happening. But I could also, Matthew, see that this person not being necessarily a Sith, because we do have, it's a self-imposed rule, but we do have the rule of 2. But that never means that there can't be more dark side users that adhere to Sith teachings, but aren't necessarily Sith themselves. For example, Asajj Ventress, Maul after he was cut in half and was no longer necessarily the apprentice. The fact that Palpatine was training Anakin to be his apprentice once Dooku was killed, and things like that. And so I could see it being multiple things. And I think that that's kind of an exciting place to be, where it doesn't have to be just this one thing. It could be multiple other things, and also shows how big or how wide reaching maybe the Sith teachings were, even when they were underground. And so I could see that. I do think it will be connected to the Sith in some way. Even if it isn't, even if he isn't necessarily, or she or they, necessarily a Sith Lord themselves.
I mean, one thing that that's why I said, like, kind of maybe pulling the strings. One thing that the Legends books established, and I don't think we've seen this in the Disney canon, but they're certainly pulling more and more from Legends canon over, is that often the Sith would encourage these dark side groups or even dark side individuals forward for 2 reasons. One, as a way of kind of testing them about maybe they could be a real part of the Sith, but also a like, oh, if we put these people forward and then they get defeated, the Jedi are going to think, okay, good, we've wiped out the Sith, and it helps to preserve their secret.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, and this hadn't occurred to me until this moment, and I'm going to make a comparison that's going to seem extreme, but actually the more I think about it, the more I think it is really fitting. Think about how we use the term Nazi today. Like, the term Nazi literally means members of a political, social, incredibly violent, militaristic movement in Germany in the 1930s and 40s. And then there have been neo-Nazi official groups, which are very intentionally attempting to recreate those ideologies, hateful and evil and awful, in Germany itself, and then also in other parts of the world, including here in the United States. Very dangerous, very much need to be looked at very seriously. At the same time, we use the word Nazi often to describe people who are by no means fully in line with Nazi ideology, but practice deeply racist, deeply nationalistic, deeply, horrific ideas, and then also do things that are similar. It's like when people talk about setting up concentration camps for immigrants, that sounds a lot like what the Nazis did. So we talk about them as Nazis. And like the Nazis as an actual party occurred within the lifetime of people who are still alive. You know, it was in the 30s and 40s. It was 80 to 90 years ago. And neo-Nazis continue to exist in our world today. Imagine the way the word Nazi would, you know, if hopefully all these neo-Nazis are eventually defeated, European elections, I'm really got my fingers crossed, you know, but like, imagine if in 100 years, Nazis are completely gone. How would the word Nazi be used 600, 700 years from now? My point being, I wonder if that word, like, there's no one in living memory. I don't think even Yoda is old enough to remember when the Sith were actually wiped out, at least as far as everyone knows. So I do kind of wonder if maybe, like, some people are like, oh, they're dark side users. They have red lightsabers. They must be the Sith. And other people are like, oh, well, maybe, or they should, like I kind of wonder if the Sith has become kind of a word that means dark side force user, even though that's not necessarily accurate. So Brian, does that kind of make sense in terms of like that from some perspectives it's the Sith, but it might not actually be the master and apprentice who are alive at this point in time?
I think that's always in Star Wars. Everybody assumes anybody with a red lightsaber is Sith, but they usually have to say, well, that doesn't necessarily, like, I don't like even with like the Inquisitors, you know, and like Asajj Ventress, like you were saying, like I think that's always a thing that like, do you have to be a Sith Lord, one of the two Sith Lords to be Sith? I guess I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's why the name the Acolyte intrigues me a lot with this, because you can have Sith acolytes, and the followers of the Sith religion, who helped bring Palpatine back. And so I think of that as well. Just like, I think the answer to do you have to be a Sith to be a Sith or what, I think is no. It does depend, like you said, Matthew, on your definition of Sith, though. Like, there's the Sith, there's the Sith religion, there's Sith acolytes. The Sith acolyte have to be a Sith? Is really interesting to me. It's really, really intriguing. And Leslie Headland is a huge EU fan. Like, she grew up reading these books and she loves them. And I've seen a lot of like influence on that. Some aspects of it. I'm not well read in the EU by any means, but people who I know are, that have said that they've seen like that influence in the show already. And so I wouldn't be surprised if it is something like you said earlier, Matthew, about the Sith kind of using these groups. I think maybe that might have been what was happening with the Coven. I think there was Sith machinations going on, and that's how we get to Jedi versus the Coven.
Yeah, I think
that's
possible.
my theory. Anything to keep Soul in the clear, okay?
I mean, I want to go back to the Sith thing, but I'll say, to me, the idea that these witches created life in these two children, and that later life is created within Shmi Skywalker that creates Anakin. To me, this doesn't necessarily make Anakin less special, as some people I know have argued. Like, to me, I see this as like, oh, maybe these people were maybe either A, the witches started to figure this out, and then the Sith later like learned about them, maybe through May or something else, and adapted that technology and able to partially help create Anakin Skywalker. Or, as you were saying, maybe the Sith were, you know, kind of influencing them to try and get them to create this kind of stuff, because they wanted to see, is this, you know, is this something that we could do? Now, let me finish this, and then please jump in. All of that implies that there was some active force that impregnated Shmi without her consent, which is a horrifically dark road for them to go down of non-consensual stuff. But that is in the EU. So, yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
Or
jump in.
Maybe she was in the Coven. I mean, all she says is like, she can't.
That's like a stretch.
She can't admit why it happened. She just can't talk about it. She doesn't. She might be hiding something. I don't know. You never know.
See, in my understanding of it is that the creation of the twins and the creation of Anakin are two completely different things. In that the twins, Mother Anastasia used the Force to create the twins, but Anakin was created of the Force, by the Force.
Right.
There is a lot of people think that it was the Sith and Palpatine who had something to do with that, who used the Force to create Anakin. But that is from a comic that is, even the comic writer himself has said, no, it was just Anakin's thinkings on it. It was his like manifestation in his mind of like what it felt like, not what it was. And so to me, Anakin has always been created by the Force. He truly was the chosen one, created by the Force to bring balance.
Right.
And not created by someone with the Force. If that
Yeah, the only place that comes from is as I understood it, is from an EU novel, Darth Plagueis, which is not canon anymore. So you're probably right. It may not be that. It may be that it's a completely separate thing of the Force instead of not. It's just an interesting theory, I thought.
Well, I guess to me, I think it's talked about another spot, and that's in the Darth Sidious Anakin Tunnel of Love sequence. Like, why is he telling that story? I felt like that story he was like hinting, like how he came to be. Like I've always watched that sequence and thought that there is something Palpatine's heavily implying to Anakin about his origin, like the creation of life and all that. Like he's implying it's like a way to save Padme, but he's also, I always thought he was also implying.
Yeah, I don't know, because I've always, I mean, this is getting off topic, sorry. But I always go back to, it is a chosen one story, but Sidious planned to be able to do what he needed to do and what he wanted done with or without Anakin. It was easier with Anakin, but he had so many contingencies in place to where know that he didn't believe he needed Anakin. And I think that would be a different story if he had had a hand in creating Anakin, and he wasn't instead just using what was already created by the Force.
Yeah, I think if they revealed that Palpatine had done it, it would feel very weird. In the book that I'm referencing, Darth Plagueis, it's Darth Plagueis, Palpatine's master, who, not that he picked Shmi Skywalker, but they just put so much dark side energy out into the world, into the universe, that in theory something like this will be created. And Palpatine is very doubtful of it, whereas his master is, kind of encouraging it. And then Palpatine finds Anakin and is like, oh, well, maybe this is that person. But yeah, so I agree with you. It is not in Disney canon at all. With the exception of that scene that you're talking about in the Tunnel of Love, which I love that phrase. But yeah, it was just a part of the theory of just thought it was interesting there. So let me though pull us back to where we're originally going with that, is that in this question of who is the Sith? Is it an offshoot group? I think we're also, and again, if this is true, I think this would be a fantastic bait and switch that they've done. I think most of us spent the first 3.5 or 4 episodes thinking, well, the show's called The Acolyte. May is one of the main characters. May is the Acolyte. Mm-hmm. I'm now starting to really doubt that. And as part of that, Brian, what are your thoughts on Mr. Jason from Jacksonville? That's what the actor plays in The Good Place, but he's a fantastic actor. He's done other things too, but in this he's playing Kimmer. I think it's pronounced Kimmer.
Chimere. Yeah.
Qymir. The kind of the merchant who's kind of going along and helping May in this episode, but encouraging her in some ways. What's your thoughts on him?
I'm 90% that he is Darth Fingers. Or whatever we're calling the Sith, the dark side user. All we know is he can wave his fingers and make things happen. But yeah, I caught on to this, I feel like in the first 2 episodes with Chimere, that I really felt like everything he was doing was kind of feeding May in some way or pushing May in directions. And then in the latest episode, the 4th episode, maybe it's because it's already a theory, but every scene I saw him doing was either using things to push her along in her quest, or dodging questions in very very obscure, very like dodgy ways. I think like an interesting thing about Star Wars is almost all of the Star Wars writing I feel is really good in that they almost never have a dark side of the Force user lie. They always like twist the truth, you know, and like whenever there's a revelation, it's usually true when they like give it to them. So like I think they're holding on to that in this show. We get like the biggest tell, I think the part where I was like, oh yeah, definitely, is when she asks Chimere if he's ever seen the Master's face, and his reply is not, no, I haven't. He says, you know, I have never seen that. You know, that's never happened. Or, you know, he redirects it to her and they change the subject. It's pretty good. There's like a couple other times that she asks some things that he just changed the subject. But I thought that's like pretty great, like dark side Sith style manipulations. And I like I said, I'm 90% that it's him. If there is a reveal that this person is somebody you've already met in the show. I also have like a really out there 10% theory that it might be Indara, but that's pretty baseless.
Interesting. Danielle, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I could see it being multiple options. Chimere, I think, is the obvious option for reasons like you said, Brian. It is all very there. He gives that creepy feeling. There's moments where he feels like Palpatine being his little tricksy self, trying to not lie, but tell the truth from a certain point of view. And and I think I wouldn't be disappointed with that at all, even if it is the obvious choice. I think some people want it to be something not super obvious, but I think sometimes the obvious thing is just good storytelling. It's obvious because it's good storytelling sometimes. And so I like the idea of him. And I think Manny Jacinto is just an amazing actor too, and has been doing that so well, and would pull the rest of it off really well as well.
He's been great.
Yeah. But I've seen some theories about Mother Coral. And I thought that was an interesting one, because I think there's more to her story too. I don't know if I buy that she would be, I call him Darth Dientes, which is Darth Teeth in Spanish. But I don't know if I think that she's him, or she's the dark side user. But I do think there's more to her story that I hope we get, and I think we will. Yeah. And then there's also the option that it could be someone we don't know, that we've not met. I think that possibility is also exciting. So yeah, I think they've really left this as like a true mystery, because the obvious option I think is Chimere, and I think we were all kind of thinking, oh yeah, it's 100% Chimere. But then there are questions that kind of creep up, like, well, what if it isn't? What if it's this thing? And I think that they've just done a good job with providing multiple options there, but kind of keeping us straight.
Yeah. Well, and this is why I framed it in terms of who is the Acolyte, because I have kind of a related theory. I definitely am thinking that they're telling us that Chimere is a lot more than he says, in part because I got all the dark side stuff. I also, though, in this episode, I kind of got a Yoda vibe from him, like in that same kind of like, I'm acting like I don't know anything. Are you sure? Aren't you supposed to do this? Isn't this what the Master wants you to do? But also here's my theory. What if May isn't the Acolyte? What if he is the Acolyte?
Yeah.
He is not, I can't call him Darth Teeth, because that makes me think of Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem. Although a Sith Lord in the Electric Mayhem would be an awesome Muppet skit. But like, what if he is, he's the Acolyte. He's been told, like, it's your job to kind of bring May into the fold, but his master is Sharktooth or Darth. I'm not gonna try and pronounce it in Spanish, whatever it is. I don't think there's any more truth to that than anything else. I think we're all just kind of throwing things out there a little bit, but it certainly seems like you said, Danielle, I just love there's so many possibilities ahead of us.
Yeah. It's all speculation, and I just love that the show has so much speculation to it. I think that's what's fascinating me on it, and really keep me on the ride. I have a lot of faith in the creators. I think and that they're doing something smart and awesome. And so far it's been pretty great.
Yeah. I want to say a quick word and just say that if you're enjoying this content, I really hope you are. If this is your first time listening to us, please hit like, please hit subscribe, please share this with people. But the best way you can support us is by becoming a member. For only $5 a month or $55 a year, you get bonus content at the end of most episodes. We'll definitely have it at the end of today. You get bonus episodes. We've been doing a Star Wars book club, and we're going to try and start doing some more things starting in the fall. You get ad-free episodes, and most importantly, you get to know that you're helping to support these podcasts. I'm in the process of trying to upgrade my audio equipment and that of my co-hosts, and becoming a member is a great way to help support all those things and just help us keep the lights on. And you get a lot of great stuff. It's only $5 a month, $55 a year, and like I said, you can find all the information in the show notes or on the website, theethicalpanda.com. So, pulling us back to this. What else is kind of striking you about the 4 episodes we've seen so far in terms of like things we're learning about the galaxy, theories you have or questions you have or things you really want to talk about?
What theories, questions I have? I mean, I've already talked about this a little bit, but I'm really intrigued to know more about May's perspective of what happened that night. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like that's the missing piece. It's the missing piece we're looking for, I think, in understanding what complicity the Jedi had in what happened to the Coven. And so for me, alongside finding out who the masked mentor is, that's the biggest part for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think episode 4 is just bringing in like a whole bunch of like it's kind of like a reaction to episode 3, and like is putting a whole bunch of questions in, like what happened with that group on the planet, why didn't they report, what's happened with May. She said she's feeling the Force and getting her Force powers back. That was a big reveal in episode 4. I think that I don't think they hit really hard that was happening, but I think they mentioned it a few times. So I'm really wondering about that. I don't know. How about you? Did you have a few?
So I have one off the wall theory that I mentioned this during our last episode where I was just trying to say, like, it could be this person. It could be this person. Hell, it could even be Venestra, could be like the Sith, because we do know that apparently there's a spy in the like Jedi group. But I was like, and then Aaron was like, wait, why do you think that? That's such an interesting theory. And I was like, oh, I just came up with that off the top of my head. I just have a vibe. There's no real notes to it. And then I rewatched episode 1, where when the group is like, oh, we need to tell the Jedi Council, it's Venestra who steps up and immediately is like, no. If we tell the Jedi Council, they have to tell the Republic. That's going to be bad for everyone. We shouldn't tell anything. Now, Venestra is old enough that she was alive during the Nihil crisis that happens in the High Republic. Side note, the show opens by saying there have been centuries of peace. This was a massive galactic-wide conflict that happened only 100 years ago. As Danielle has pointed out on her Twitter, I believe, or TikTok, Marcion Rowe is going, hey, one of my chopped liver. But even so, however that lines up, I don't know. I'm not going to be, I think there's only a 10% chance it's Venestra, but if it is, I'm going to have a little bit of a fist pump of like, oh, wow, I caught that and I didn't even realize why I did.
I reject that.
That's fair. That's fair.
And what's Sol not telling May too? Like, there's a lot of like he's like, hey, I'll explain when we get back on the ship after that.
I think it's that he knows. So he says that whenever Osha is talking about how it's May's fault, and she doesn't understand why he wants so badly to talk to her. And he says, there's more to it. I'll tell you when we get back to the ship. I think is him wanting to finally come clean about what happened, and that what happened on Bryndock that night isn't May's fault. It's not Osha's fault. It's the Jedi's fault, or the Jedi had a hand in it. And Osha has been placing this blame on May for so long when it never really belonged on May's shoulders.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's what he wants to tell her. He said the cursed words, though. No one who ever says, "I'll tell you later,"
Oh my God,
ever gets to say, "I'll tell you what they wanted later." So I am going to be, if anything bad happens to Soul, just know that I'll be crying.
I have a lot of thoughts on Soul, and that's gonna be the focus of our bonus content at the end of this episode. Again, sign up to become a member if you want to hear more about that. Yeah, I really want to have that conversation. The only other thing I will bring up, and this isn't to push the Nestra theory, but it's to say that I think that they've mentioned the idea within the Jedi. Clearly, they want to tie this into the High Republic books, and I don't think it's coincidental that the newest High Republic book, which I have not finished, I know Danielle has, but it focuses really on this time of, and when I say a galactic-wide conflict, it's that the Nihil have literally taken over half of the galaxy. And it's this horrific fight, and there's all these things happening. I don't want to do spoilers, but one of the things that's happening is that a lot of Jedi are dealing with a lot of feelings that they never thought they'd have to deal with. A lot of fear, a lot of like, maybe we're not as strong as we thought we were, a lot of like hopelessness and depression, and that they're openly talking about how some of them are feeling pulled to the dark side because of this. And some of this have even like dallied with the dark side a little bit because of this. Again, mostly like the negative thing, but also just their own feelings of attachment, and the feelings of loss, as a lot of Jedi have been cut off from them, and realizing that they have stronger attachments than they thought they did, how that's leading them into some not great places. My point in all this is, I know they don't want to pay that off too much because they don't want to alienate people who haven't read the books. But I feel like by the end of the show, it would make a lot of sense if we do find out that someone in the Jedi has been helping these dark side people in some way, and that it is somehow connected to the trauma they went through during the events being talked about in the High Republic books. Just because it feels like such an easy connection of, you've got all these Jedi being exposed to things that are pulling some of them to the dark side. Some of them have lived until now, or they're people they trained have lived, and maybe that was passed on. So I don't know. It's just a theory. It may not happen at all, but it feels weird that these things come out at almost the exact same time, and there isn't more of a tie-in.
Yeah, I think that it is definitely interesting, Vernestra saying, I know a Jedi fighting when I see it, or whatever it was that she said. I know Jedi training when I see it, in regards to May's fighting. And it did make me wonder, say that Chimere is the masked mentor. Was he once a Jedi? If the masked mentor is someone we've never met, will it be someone who was once a Jedi? And to your point, Matthew, I think it would be an interesting tie into the books, but I also don't think it has to be necessarily like directly related to that in order for it to be tangentially related to it, if that makes sense. Because of all the changes that were put into place in the Jedi Order as a result of Marky and Rose Nihil, did that lead to what eventually could have led to this, and so on and so forth. But yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
I mean, certainly like someone who was deeply traumatized and maybe starts flirting with the dark side a little bit might unintentionally, pass some of that on to their Padawan might get more of that kind of an idea, and that gets passed on to the next Padawan. And yeah, you're right. It definitely does not have to be the exact person. Go ahead.
I have nothing to add about this because I don't know anything about the Nihil or those books.
Well,
but I do kind of hope it's all self-contained in the show.
That's fair.
Yeah, like I want it to be in that kind of like, it's a reference that like where they tell it to you and you're like, oh, okay, there was a big battle a long time ago and that's what affected people. But then those of us who read the books can be like, oh yes, I know what they're talking about,
Yeah.
The last question that I have is, we're kind of talking about it, but I want to say directly, what is the show teaching you about the Jedi?
I think, that's tough. Brian, go ahead.
For me, this is the first live action that's really, I mean, this was definitely in the prequels to a degree. I guess that's not, but this is the first like live action show to me that's showing the Jedi as like a bureaucracy kind of, and like this like this organization that probably has good and bad parts about it, and it's like, it's more about the people in it, that choose how to act within that organization than the organization as a whole, maybe. Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is like, maybe they and maybe like Jedi have never been like the the pinnacle of good within the society of the Force.
Yeah, I think on a similar note, I've always been very protective of the Jedi and the Jedi Order. I think because primarily when we see them in the prequels, I mean, they're so close to their genocide, and I hate seeing people say like, "Oh, they deserved it," or like they, because no one deserves that, regardless of they made a few mistakes, and they did wrong. They did things that were wrong, but ultimately, like, they didn't deserve what happened to them. And I think that both the High Republic, well, let me say, I think that the High Republic book series gave me like them to like really root for. And then the Acolyte is giving me them with enough space from both of those eras to really look at their complexities, both good and bad. And I appreciate that. I appreciate being able to separate myself enough from my protective feelings of them and my rooting feelings for them to be able to see where they went wrong and how they went wrong, and how that can coexist with also them. Ultimately, I think they are the good guys, but that doesn't mean that they're good or right all the time. And I like being able to see that in the show. I feel like they've balanced that quite well in the show.
Yeah. I think the term bureaucracy is one of the best ways to describe it, because bureaucracies, I think, is the kind of thing that can do the most damage without intending to, because it's not some of them are malicious, to be sure. Some of them are really trying to do good, but just the nature of bureaucracy is that individual people get stuck in it, and look at someone like Yord, who I think clearly has like the biggest heart, the biggest pectoral muscles, like a lot of great things about him, but has also been caught up in this kind of like, I'm a Jedi, I know best, everyone should be listening to me, why aren't you listening to me? And you look at him now and you're like, oh, I want to pat you on the head, you cute little baby fascist. But like, if 30 years he's on the Jedi Council, I'd be like, well, this is really bad. Like, smack him around and teach him some lessons. And like, yeah, like one of my absolute favorite TV shows is The Wire, because one of the things that The Wire really highlights is that like institutions, in this case, it's mostly talking about like the institutions in the government of Baltimore, the police department, the mayor's office, the Department of Education, and teachers. Like, you can go into it with the best of intentions and just get chewed up and spat out. And yeah, so I really love that. The other side of it for me is that in both the High Republic and like, I know, Danielle, you and I don't see the Jedi in the prequel era quite the same, but I do agree with you. Like, they're not evil. They're not like, they don't deserve anything to happen. But I think one thing that we've learned in a couple of places is that they're a little bit more about the letter of the law than the spirit. They're a little bit more like doctrinaire about the letter of the law than the spirit of the law than they have been at other times in their history.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think we're seeing in the High Republic and here is Jedi who have strong attachments, and it doesn't always end well. And I'm looking at that and thinking like, oh, I could well understand how people would go through some of this stuff and come to the perspective of, you know what if we just stop? What if we just tell Jedi to not have attachments anymore? Because, or, like, there's just been so much muddy gray area and it's gotten us in so many problems. Let's just draw some strict lines.
Yeah.
Which is what happens all the time when people are afraid of the muddy gray areas. And I don't think it's exact. It's not, even by the Jedi times, there's definitely, the prequel times, there's definitely still a lot of muddiness. But yeah, it just, to me, if you're going to tell me that the Jedi of the prequel era are different than the others, I also want to know how they got there. And I think the show is doing a really good job of giving some possible ways that it might have happened.
Yeah, I agree. I think Vernestra's, oh, sorry, Brian.
No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think Vernestra is such an important character to show that, even, well, I mean, maybe not for people who've not read the book series, but for me, as someone who has read it, it's very important to have her there to see that, like, she is from a time where the Jedi were at their golden era, essentially, was when she was a Jedi Knight, and so I've seen a lot of people be like, it's so disappointing to see her go from being who she was in the books to this like stricter Jedi Master in the show. And I think that's the point. I think the point is that she lived through so much, and she experienced and was damaged in so many different ways. Well, damaged isn't the correct word, but she went through a lot, and I can see how I see that push and pull in her, the want to be back in that time when things were better, and when the Jedi were allowed to do these things, but also the wisdom, I think, of what happened, and the fear of not wanting to let it happen again. And so maybe the push and pull between wisdom and fear, and there's a fine balance there that I can see when I watch her, even though she's not in that many scenes. I see her trying to like struggle with that balance. And I think that for me, it's important to have her in that position in this show.
So so she's in the novels as well, I guess.
Yes, she's in phase
what
one.
What other characters are do show up in the other media?
None so far.
Okay, so Master Soul isn't.
No.
Okay. Okay. So everybody's a new character.
I thought Carrie-Anne Moss's character was in the High Republic books.
Indara? No.
Yeah.
There's a master called Indira.
Right.
So that might be.
Can we talk about Indara? Was she just on this outer rim planet with a gang when they introduce her in the first episode? I'm really sure there's going to be like a lot of Indara dirt coming.
I mean, I know the first episode, I thought, why in the world would you push that you have Carrie-Anne Moss so much and then have her die within the first 5 minutes? And so the fact that she came back in a flashback episode, I was like, oh, okay, we're getting to see her acting a lot more. And yeah, I mean, I think we're going to get at least one more flashback episode, and we'll probably learn a lot more about all 4 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love when a major actor is used as a smoke screen, like when they like surprise you with what happens to them, like that, like kill them off in the first scene. That's like one of my favorite things that a media can do, because it just takes that outside. It takes the fact that you cheated and knew that there was like this person's more important than this role might look. You know.
That's fair. That's fair.
I love it.
The one last thing I'll say about Vernestra, and that I think actually, Danielle, you made a great point there, and that convinces me that she shouldn't be dark side, because like. I've often talked about how much I hate the moment that Dooku is revealed to be a Sith all along, because he was actually making really good points that would make sense for someone who thinks they're doing good and is seeing real problems, and that's the kind of chaos that the dark side can manipulate. So yeah, actually, I really don't want Vernestra to be dark side, because I want her to be, as you just said, like just damaged and hurt by all this. And I was thinking about it again in terms of that bureaucracy comment about how, because I studied a lot of this in grad school, what's often looked at in like when you're studying bureaucracies or institutions as one of the like red lines that gets crossed is when then they start thinking that their organization itself is so important that they're willing to kind of betray their own principles to protect the institution itself. Because and so her idea of like, you know, Jedi are supposed to be honest and tell the truth, and her saying, well, but the Jedi have to be protected, so we should tell this lie and not tell people about what's happening. You know, it's a fairly small thing. It's a fairly small foot across that line, but it's definitely a foot across the line of you're now protecting the institution instead of the mission that the institution is supposed to be serving, you know?
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think that might be a theme of the show, is like acting genuine, you know, I guess, or be it like identity and like and the consequences of your actions. Like I think that's kind of cool that they went there with that scene too.
Yeah,
you're right, because so much was about like did that original group of Jedi that's being hunted tell a lie in order to, have this greater story in order to protect the Jedi or protect these kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is where we'll wrap up. We'll have some bonus content in just a moment from members. Again, only $5 a month. All the information in the show notes. Danielle, any last? So Danielle, tell us one more time where people can find your stuff.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok at WrittenInTheStarWars, on Twitter at DannyS394, and I write reviews for Temple of Geek, so you can go over there and find me too.
Awesome. And Brian, you have a very good media setup already, a very nice mic and boom and headphones. I know you've said you've never podcasted about media like this, but I think you've done you've created some sort of stuff about magic and or tell us where people can find you.
Oh, I'm just a podcast guest for the most part, and I do some magic coverage occasionally from the store. So you can find my magic coverage is usually will mostly be on Misty Mountain Twitch TV, Misty Mountain Games. We'll have it on our YouTube too, which I think is also Misty Mountain Games. I don't know, it's kind of scattered, so it's hard to list it all off. But yeah, I've been on Spike Colony, a magic pre-modern podcast a bit, and I guess that's mostly it. Some
awesome
coverage in that. Yeah.
It's been wonderful having you on as a guest. We'll definitely have you back. I love it. All your perspectives. And let me actually just ask as a closing question to tie it back into the theme. I know you through Magic, but obviously this is a very kind of fluid time for trading card games like Magic, and a lot of new ones coming out. And given this is a Star Wars podcast, are you guys doing Star Wars Unlimited events at your store?
Oh yeah, I'm deep in that game. I got really into the first set. We did a couple bigger tournaments. I almost did a coverage thing, but I wanted to play so bad in my own events that I didn't. But we recorded matches and stuff, and there's some out there somewhere on YouTube, I think.
Awesome. Well, if nothing else, I want to have you on my other podcast, Superhero Ethics, because I want to do an episode on how the abilities of the characters and stuff, because all the cards in the game are it's like a Han Solo card and a Star Destroyer card. And I want to talk about how those line up to the lore and how those don't. If nothing else, I'm so happy because there's a card called Shoot First, and it's an ability to basically get an ambush attack, and it's a picture of Han Solo sitting in a cantina with a smoking gun. And I'm like, it's like the game is saying no, Han shot first, which I just love so much. So, all right, thank you both so much. Members, stick around for our bonus content. If you're not a member, please think about becoming one. For everybody else, we have spoken. All right, members, welcome back. Thank you again so much. You're really what makes this all possible. Danielle, tell me a bit about Soul.
Soul?
Why do you love him? Soul.
My dear master Soul. He's so soft. I guess what pulled me to him first is that he deeply cares about Osha, and I really love the fact that when he saves her from falling off the cliff, he looks at her the same way he looked at her when he recruited, saved, however you want to look at it, her when she was 10 years old on Brendok. And that it feels like a genuine care from him that maybe he didn't really know what to do with, and he didn't really understand either when he first met her. But I love that from a character. I'm a sucker for that from especially male characters. And I like that there's a little bit of intrigue there about, he's not telling the full story. And what will that be? And as much as I hate heartbreak and I don't want him to have done anything bad, I think that adds a lot to a character, and it adds a lot to an actor who is able to play that and have you wondering about it. I also am really intrigued by the different ways that he interacts with Osha and Jeki, his former Padawan and his current Padawan. How much of the way that he's more formal with Jeki than he is with Osha is because of lessons he learned from Osha. Is him maybe trying to put up a barrier there, and how much of it is that Jeki just needs needs to be taught differently than Osha did. She doesn't have the trauma that Osha did, and so she doesn't need the comfort that Soul needed to give to Osha. So I think there's just so much to love about him and so much to be scared of for him. And I'm just really, Lee Jung-jae is a phenomenal actor. And when Leslie Headland said that she was watching Squid Game when she was writing the character of Soul, and she saw him and said, that's Soul. And I can absolutely see it. You can absolutely see it. So I think he's one of the best cast, I think, in the show.
Yeah, I think he has like super empathy, right? Like he's just like just really just good at like seeing things from others' point of view. Like I think there's like just that air of him that he's like so involved in the people around him and understand. Like he's the do the right thing guy of the show.
Yeah.
I think his conflicts are really lay into like a lot of what we were talking about with how does one act in a bureaucracy, and when do you avoid it? When do you go with it?
Yeah, and I think that's so true. The empathy comes across so powerfully, and I mean, I would say that by the definitions, I think that someone like Yoda uses, this is definitely an attachment he has to Osha. But I think we're seeing that it doesn't necessarily have to be bad. And part of me wants it to be that, like, you know, he got like a slap on the wrist, and that's why he's a little bit more standoffish with Jackie. But I also like what you said, that he just knows Jackie needs a different kind of leadership style.
Yeah.
I want to put out this theory, and I love Obi-Wan. I think Obi-Wan absolutely did his best in a very hard situation. I think that if this version of Saul was Anakin's master, I don't think Anakin falls.
Oh, I don't know.
I
think Anakin would have not liked Soul because he was so soft. I think that Soul is soft in a different way than Qui-Gon is. As much as people compare Qui-Gon and Soul, and I do think there are similarities there, I think that Soul and Anakin wouldn't have meshed. I really don't. I think Anakin, regardless of whether he turns or not, I think that he needed someone who pushed him and who would... I don't know that he would have been receptive to someone comforting him, someone who wasn't Qui-Gon anyway. Like I picture Obi-Wan trying to comfort him, and I don't know that I would see Anakin being receptive to it. I don't know. It is an interesting question, though.
And I'll admit here again, I'm very influenced by some of the EU books that I've read, but I think even in the movie, like, I get the sense that Obi-Wan doesn't really know what. Like, I think I'm mostly thinking of Anakin at Phantom Menace age. You know, when he's lost his mother, he's gone through all this stuff, and he doesn't know what to do with those feelings. And Obi-Wan is telling him, you know, be mindful of your feelings, be present in the Force. I think if someone had just given Anakin a 10-minute hug at about that point and, like, you know, really shown him empathy, I think that changes a lot of his trajectory. And maybe, yeah, by the time he's 13, he's like, get me some guy who's going to teach me how to kick ass. I don't want this guy anymore. You know, I don't know. But to me, Saul really reminds me of Kanan Jarrus in that they're both so comfortable with attachment without it violating what they should be doing. And I've always thought that Kanan could have helped keep Anakin from the dark side. And you're right. Maybe that Anakin wouldn't have been able to hear it beyond that first moment.
Do you know what I think will be interesting, given, like, going off from that, is if Osha becomes the Acolyte? What if she falls? What if she, like, this whole time we were thinking it is, you know, May, obviously, maybe not. What if Osha's the one who turns and goes down this wrong path? And what does that say about Soul? Like, or what will Soul have to consider about his teachings then and things like that? So I don't know. I just kind of thought about that.
Oh, wow.
There's this yin yang Osha May thing. Like May is like trying to turn away from doing the dark side thing because she's met Osha now, you know, and Osha's getting her Force powers back now that she's met May. And also, do you remember, did you see on the Wookiee's wall, there was like a yin yang symbol and like literally on the wall with like, I like almost wanted to pause it and just really stare at that because they settle on that wall for a while. Like it's really important.
I think there's more. There's
Um,
definitely more to it than what we've seen for that. Yeah.
This series is so interesting to me because in some of the other media I've been talking about, I've been watching Legacies, which is the newest of the Vampire Diaries universe of shows, and actually is really good. It's still kind of trashy, but I love that. But they're going into a plot line that I feel like I've seen many, many times before, which I refer to as the Dark Phoenix trope, which is a young woman, so it's always a young woman, has incredible amounts of power, and as a child, she doesn't know how to use it and winds up killing people by accident. And her superiors basically change her they try to protect her from the knowledge of what she's done, and so they lie to her and they change her memories through some sort of magic or power or whatever, so that she doesn't ever know what she did. And of course, always in the story it gets revealed. And generally I don't like these stories because often they're very sexist and often they're very like men have to control women who are more powerful than them, and like there's a lot of bad tropes there. But there is an interesting core to that story, and yeah, like what if it was all OSHA's fault somehow? And that's why they have like changed everything. It's to protect it wasn't even to protect it, and it, like they were sort of like, let's hope that May is dead because we want OSHA to be not have to ever remember what she did in this moment.
Or even that's an interesting point. Or even if it was just not that, but that OSHA fall, like we see this series is about OSHA falling. You know what I mean?
Right,
like
yeah.
Not necessarily that she did anything bad when she was young, but that because what you said, Brian, when you said about May is like we see her trying to turn away from her dark path because her loyalty lies with OSHA and not with the Masked Master. I see this thread between them of the different reactions they had to finding out the other was alive. May's reaction was that she immediately doesn't care about what she was doing before. She just cares about her sister. And OSHA's reaction was, I can't care about my sister. I have to get rid of her. Or if I can't do it, someone else has to get rid of her. And I think to a certain extent, OSHA does blame herself for what happened on Brindock, but not necessarily because it was her fault, but because she wanted to go with the Jedi. And May, that was the reason May was so upset. And if she believes that May is the one that caused the explosion with the fire, then the only reason May did that was because she was mad at OSHA. The only reason she was mad at OSHA is because OSHA wanted to go with the Jedi. And so I think she does blame herself. And I think it would be an interesting story to see that blame and that guilt and that desire to correct her wrong, or what she perceives to be her wrong, lead her down ultimately a bad path.
Oh, yeah. I love that.
The falling I didn't realize all the falling, like it just didn't click until you were talking about that, how falling is just a constant, or being saved from falling is a constant theme in here. Yeah. So and also how much OSHA is like kind of just following where everybody leads her, like so far in the show. And it feels like now that she's found out May's alive and she's coming out of that, and maybe that's going to turn her into a different kind of differently motivated person,
Interesting. The saving from falling. That's an excellent catch. Yeah.
Especially because it's literally Saul.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't be able to save May from falling, but does save OSHA from falling at a different point.
Yeah. And how long will he be able to?
Now May's on the dark side and OSHA isn't. And OSHA's just depending on other people to keep her from turning, Yeah. That's got to break eventually, right? I don't know.
Will he eventually save May and not be able to save OSHA? Chills.
Yeah. I think
that.
Yeah, all Star Wars, like Star Wars at its best, it's always like, this kind of like battle of emotions and like personal journeys and stuff like that in like moment of truth. Like it's about, Star Wars is about feelings at its center, I think. Yeah. Like this is why I never like worry about like whether hyperspace can destroy a ship or not, because like it's always,
that's not what matters.
Yes, like physics that they make up. You know, you can stand outside on a spaceship, you know, and there's free fire in space. You know, all that stuff. Like, who cares? You know, who cares about the science? It's not about science. It's a fantasy series. That just happens to be in space.
Yeah.
We're arguing about the age of a particular character when
God.
the idea that a year is defined as our particular planet, how long it takes to go around our particular star. Like the concepts like a year, a day would be so different on every planet. So who the hell cares? It's all a conceit. Anyway, thank you both so much. This was awesome. Thank you to all of our members. You're what makes it possible. We have spoken. And we're out.
Great.